I'm Big Don Luka, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here by my co-host, Jaren.
What is up, guys?
Today, we are going to be getting into the Mavericks 130-126 matinee game loss versus the Phoenix Suns yesterday. It was a rough affair, sort of battle of the stars where we really saw the Luka and Kyrie versus Booker and KD effect to an absolute T. It was only KD's third game with the Suns. Obviously a really high scoring affair, but the Mavericks defense at times wasn't even really that bad. It was just a very gut-wrenching loss overall, especially, how the game ended up ensuing there at the end, where we had the whole Luka and Booker scuffle because of Luka missing a potentially wide open game-tying layup. Jaren, what are your quick thoughts on the Mavericks loss to the Suns yesterday?
I think that this is one where, yes, it sucks, but at the same time, I still feel like there's many facets that this team could have won. One of those being if Luka, hadn't hit like two of his shots. I know that's counterintuitive, and I know you can say, if someone had hit another shot, we'd be in a different situation. But Luka, needless to say, didn't have the best game. And I still feel like if it was a normal game from him, we probably would have beat this team. I know it's KD's third game with the Suns, so they're probably still figuring some things out, but it kind of seems like they're in playoff form. They're ready to win. They've been doing their thing, and I still feel like that this Mavericks team could have beat them, but without, a doubt, like we did lose. But I just want to say, like, this will be, if or when they do meet up in the playoffs, it'll be an interesting series. And I think that you can tally that one as one of the biggest what ifs if it doesn't happen, and probably one of the best playoff series maybe ever if it does happen. So interested to see. Definitely next time that these two meet, it will have to be in the playoffs if they do, but looking forward to it. And I'm looking forward to talking about it because it was an interesting, really fun game. I would say it's probably like the most interesting / fun, or however you want to title it, loss of the year. So
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with you from that standpoint. I mean, you have no way of actually forecasting how a playoff series would turn out, of course, but just based on this team and the rivalry that has evolved, especially after last year's playoff series, along with how this game finished, you can definitely see the smoke in the water there, and how if this playoff series were to come into fruition, it would be very competitive, and regardless of who won, there would be a lot of chirping back and forth. So it was a really fun game, but the Mavericks only do have 17 games of the season left in the season, and every loss is more and more degrading. So from that perspective, it was obviously very gut-wrenching. It was one of those tough pills to swallow as a fan, having seen the Mavericks in this one, just with another clutch time loss where they fell apart late in that fourth quarter after, being up for a majority of the third quarter. I wouldn't necessarily call it a total and utter collapse. They were facing a very high-powered offensive Suns team who, stars and KD and Booker in particular can get a shot off wherever they want at any time. And they were hitting some really tough shots tonight. I mean, I guess yesterday rather, because the game was a matinee game, but it still doesn't really ease the wound whatsoever, just because of how, I guess, harder it was for the Mavericks to be able to guard them in this game. It's not necessarily like one of the OKC loss earlier this year where you just are kind of, left with your head scratching after the game, just due to the fact of how much of a collapse it was. And, the whole lesser opponent complex. The Mavericks didn't play down to their opponent today, but they still definitely suffered a blow that was not negligible by any means. And it could definitely come back to haunt them as they approach the playoffs here. With 17 games left, it wraps the season up with the season series up with the Suns, where I believe the Mavericks went 2-2. So we'll have to see how all that plays out. But we'll be getting into yesterday's game, of course. But before we do that, here's an ad from our sponsor, Anchor. All right, Jaren. So getting into this one, as we started there in that first quarter, I think a big narrative that we can take away was the struggles that Luka Doncic had. I believe he went 1 for 7 in that first quarter. It appeared as if he was kind of wincing after a couple plays, battling a little bit of an injury. Just wasn't really able to hit his shots, as simple as that. When he was getting into the paint and he was attacking from the perimeter, he was leaving things short a little bit, or things were going in and out. The Mavericks still were able to sort of ride the coattails of some hot shooting by Tim Hardaway Jr. towards the end of the quarter, as well as Kyrie really spearheading the attack. But they did come away losing that first quarter, 31-25. How did you think the game started for them, particularly, just offensively with Luka's slow start, as well as defensively? Because I thought defensively they actually, particularly in that first quarter, was one of their better quarters, despite giving up 31 points. Just from the methods that they were instituting to be able to, trap KD and Booker towards the end once they started getting hot. And I mean, they played them good straight up at the beginning, and they missed a few shots, but once they started to cook, there's really just not much they could do about it. So what did you think about the first quarter in its entirety?
Yeah, I mean, the first quarter definitely started out slow from both ends by the Mavericks. Luka, of course, got off to his slow start. I think it was in that first quarter, at least towards the end, he was starting to grimace as he was like kind of going down the court. Like, I feel like I don't think we ever really knew what it was, but I only have to assume it was that heel or that ankle or whatever it was. Some sort of foot injury is what I would guess. But other than that, like, I think the Mavericks, like I said, started out slow, definitely finished the quarter a little bit better. I think I feel like the Suns went up by 9 points or 11 points at one point, whenever Jason Kidd called a timeout. And it kind of seemed like after that timeout, they got their things together, they got their offense together, and it all started trickling together. I know that they ended up the quarter down by 6. It didn't help that I think KD hit like a 3-pointer late in the game, or not late in the game, but late in the first quarter, to kind of extend that lead. But I still feel like, you said it was one of their better defensive quarters. I would kind of disagree there, just from the sense that I feel like the Suns shot like 66% from the field in that quarter, and it was all counterintuitive from the perimeter defense, allowing things inside. Whenever you have Dwight Powell playing, there's really not much you can do whenever it comes inside. And it was all Devin Booker, all Kevin Durant, sort of scoring on that borderline paint, kind of elbow area. I think that's, I know that you said it's better, and they definitely picked it up as the quarter went along. But I just think, whether it was, closing out too quick or the offensive player having the better first step, whatever it was, I just think that they got things really going by scoring inside the paint. And that's kind of what, sort of defeated the Mavericks throughout this whole game, was just that narrative of getting inside and scoring. I know, like I said, they sort of not clamped up, but it sort of got a little bit better as the quarter went along. And especially as the game went along, there was times where it was a lot better defensively, but I still feel like that was sort of the narrative set. And they started out, in the first 2 minutes, they went up like 12-4 or whatever it was. And from there, like, it kind of seemed like they had the game in locks, but the Mavericks still fought back. They had a 11-point lead or 8-point lead. I think it was 8-point lead at one point in that game. And without further ado, I mean, we saw the ending, of course. It was fun, but I think in that first quarter, it was a little slow start, but they definitely picked it up.
Yeah, I think particularly the starters definitely had some lackluster moments defensively, but I think I was more alluding to the rotations and the team defense that the Mavericks played. I thought that their man-to-man defense honestly got better as the game went along, as they started throwing different guys at KD, where we saw Frank, Justin Holiday, some of those other guys get looks on KD on defense. But in that first quarter, I thought in particular the Mavericks just had like active hands, and they were, even if they were getting beat off of KD and Booker mid-range shots, and those guys were able to get the first step and get a defender on their hip, I don't know. It just didn't feel as if there was like much they could really do about it, as skilled as those guys are. So I guess that's the reason I said that, but I do see your point for sure. Nonetheless, as the Mavericks went ahead and got into the second quarter there, they were able to eliminate some of the leakage that happened in the first quarter, particularly as you allude to with DeAndre Ayton. The Suns, we know, when they were able to penetrate on, X whatever Mavericks defender, they were doing a good job getting it to him in the dunker spot, and he was able to. I think he had like 6 points in the first quarter and scored like 3 the rest of the game or something of that nature. And the Mavericks just had a really tough time playing the pick and roll. There were a few times that they ended up trying to trap KD or Booker, and it backfired on them by leaving DeAndre Ayton wide open in the pick and roll, and creating that 4-on-3 scenario to where he either was able to just go up for a layup or pass it back out to consolidate to one of their perimeter shooters. So that obviously created some issues. But once he took a little bit of a rest there, and some of the rebounding burden that he was relieving from the Suns was gone, I definitely thought that the intensity was, able to be directed a little more on KD and Booker, because the Mavericks weren't having to when they're rotating a guy over from, the weak side or from the painted area, when those guys would start to penetrate, they don't have as big of a, offensive threat in there with Ayton, as compared to like Jock Landale. So I think that was a big reason as to why the Mavericks could really furnish their perimeter defense, and they were able to get after it a little more even in the second quarter, which I would probably diagnose as their best defensive quarter of the game. It's the only one where they held the Suns under 30, and they also had a really good scoring game. Luka came back in, I believe, with like 5-ish minutes after kind of battling with an injury. He came in a little later in the second quarter than he typically does, but he made a 3. He really started to use a different variety of up fakes, especially in the post, to draw some of those lesser Phoenix defenders in, like Terrence Ross, and he was getting to the foul line, starting to eat. And Kyrie was just doing a really masterful job snaking the pick and roll and getting to his spots in the mid range. And the Mavericks were able to sort of ride the coattails of that, along with Tim Hardaway Jr.'s insanely hot shooting, particularly at the beginning of the second quarter, where, he was making transition threes, catch and shoot for threes. At one point he got fouled on a 3-pointer above the break and made all his free throws. He was doing, it was just the, typical ultimate Tim Hardaway Jr. offensive game when he gets fiery from 3, and the Mavericks were huge benefactors from that. And it was exciting to watch. Along with that, he didn't even necessarily play the most terrible defense. I thought it was one of his better games of the year. So I think that they had a really good second quarter because of that. But nonetheless, the script kind of seemed to flip come the second half a little bit, as we see time in and time again with this Mavericks team, where, once Ayton really came back in and got a more established role in that third quarter, you could definitely see the pressure on the rim that was put by the Suns in there definitely came back to haunt the Mavericks, because it allowed KD or Booker to be able to get their spots without as much trapping or without as much double teams at the point of attack. What fell apart for the Mavericks defensively in the second half of that game, and how did that lead to their ultimate demise in the end?
Yeah, I think it was more so Phoenix ability to kind of collapse inside the paint. The Mavericks, still playing the perimeter defense, or at least man-on-man defense that they were playing in the second quarter. Whereas you alluded to, I agree with you. I think it was their best quarter defensively. But heading into that third quarter, I think something, I want to say Kevin Durant entered that quarter with like 17 points at half, and then finished it with like 30. Like pretty much through that whole entire third quarter, it was just easy offense, whether it was ISO offense. I think Chris Paul got it going from deep. It really wasn't effective like in the pick and roll or anything like that. I just think Phoenix's ability to collapse the defense and sort of kick out was their best bet. And whether it was that or, Kevin Durant or even Devin Booker for that matter, working inside. I know Devin Booker got quite a bit of paints from just like the layup line pretty much. He was able to easily get inside and pretty much score whatever he wanted to do, whether it was off the backboard or whatever it was. I just think that was sort of their best bet, was sort of collapsing the defense. It wasn't Dallas's best defensive effort in that third quarter. If anything, I would probably tally that as like the worst defensive quarter throughout this game at least. But I still feel like I'm trying to think of like who the lineups were, but whenever Tim Hardaway's out there, whenever Luka's out there, those are guys that are, at least throughout this game, net negatives. I know Tim Hardaway had one of his best defensive games, but rotationally, it's still, it's a Tim Hardaway rotational defensive game. And even for Luka, that mattered. He just really no effort given on defense, at least through most of that game, and especially through that third quarter. But I think defensively it fell apart for the Mavericks. They allowed the Suns to kind of get back in it whenever they had not the game in their hands, but they had a sizable lead, and they kept a sizable lead through at least most of that third quarter. But as soon as that fourth quarter time starts coming down, we've seen it time and time again where the Mavericks, they can't just hold on to a lead. Their offense starts to diminish, and that's kind of what happened. Phoenix was able to exploit, the one-on-one defense from the Mavericks. They were getting the matchups they wanted, and that's exactly what happened. And even offensively, things kind of slowed a little bit. They didn't fall apart or anything, but they slowed down a little bit for the Mavericks. And I think that's just sort of what led into the fourth quarter demise, if you want to tally it as that. I think it was, like I said, a great game. But it had its moments for Mavericks, defensively, and more so in that third quarter, I think was really just a black hole at times on defense.
Yeah, no, I definitely would tend to agree with you, especially just how the fourth quarter offense ended up stalling out at the end there, because the Mavericks didn't really have any offensive woes throughout large stretches of this game. I mean, despite the issues that we alluded to earlier with Luka and really just his inability to, make anything tonight. I mean, it almost seemed as if he was like aiming at points and he was getting frustrated and he was slow to get back on defense, clamoring to the refs all night. They were still, I mean, just by virtue of the penetration that he and Kyrie were creating, I mean, they had, Luka had one of his lower assist games in this one, and he had 5 turnovers, which, the Mavericks only had 10 turnovers as a whole, but a lot of Luka's turnovers did seem to come to be like very lackadaisical, or, if he was getting trapped, they were just like simple throwaways. He just didn't seem maybe as savvy and as bright-eyed as he usually is in that aspect. But I mean, at the end of the day, he still ended up having 34 points, despite how, I guess, just limited his offensive game was in this one, given the constraints, I guess, he was putting on himself. And I mean, that in itself speaks to how good he is, but nonetheless, it was definitely a big inhibition on the Mavericks at times. And they actually started at the fourth quarter really well, because I mean, in that second half, towards the end of the third and fourth quarter, I mean, Christian Wood really started to catch fire offensively, and he was not a black hole defensively by any means. I mean, he wasn't, that coveted rim protector or anything, but he was still doing decent against Ayton, and when he was in switch scenarios against smaller guys, because the Mavericks were very switch heavy tonight. I mean, you could definitely tell that they were kind of trying to throw the kitchen sink at some of these, some of the Suns playmakers and KD and Devin Booker. They played a little bit of matchup zone. They were just throwing a plethora of wing defenders and trapping them at different points. But in summation, it just ended up really just not mattering too much, because, I mean, really, the Mavericks don't have the defensive personnel to be able to counteract a team like the Suns, nor does really anybody in the league. But I mean, the Mavericks even more so than a lot of teams, just with the amount of length that the Suns have offensively and the way that those guys are able to create shots at a moment's notice. So, I mean, I thought that they did as good as they could have, but I don't know if there was necessarily any rotation that was a solvent to their issues tonight, to be honest with you. I guess that's why I don't come away from this game thinking, oh, we should have played this one. Like, there's different teams that I will, come away from the game thinking the Mavericks should have went to X, Y, or Z. This game was really just not one of them because of how good that Suns team is offensively. But the Mavericks, they got themselves into a shootout, and I think that they knew that. And the non-Luka minutes in the fourth quarter actually are really good. We've had some sort of struggles, I guess, as of recent with Kyrie and Christian Wood playing together in the non-Luka minutes, just how, I guess, ball dominant it gets at times from them, just from more so the perspective that the offensive flow doesn't seem there at times when the Mavericks aren't able to get running in transition. Not necessarily, I guess, with Kyrie and his isolation attempts, but sometimes when Christian Wood stalls out possessions, there's been a little bit of that. But I mean, he's still been mildly effective. But I mean, tonight he was doing just a great job pinpointing mismatches and getting to the rim, as well as when Ayton was in there and kind of stretching the floor on him. He made a 3 in that fourth quarter, I believe. And, the Mavericks sort of rode it out with Christian Wood until about 3 minutes left. And the offense started to get a little bit stale from there. And I'm not saying that Christian Wood in himself was a direct resultant or cause, I guess, rather, of the offense stalling out in those last couple of minutes. But, I do think he was pretty essential to readying the storm and keeping the Mavericks back in the game in that fourth quarter. Just the way that he was able to be such a such a dynamic roll and pop of type of guy. So that was interesting to see. But Jaren, obviously the Mavericks just another clutch time loss here, and you can play devil's advocate and talk about just how good the Suns were, and how it's unfair with the just amount of star power that they have offensively. I mean, Chris Paul, yes, I get he's old, but he was still relegated to like just a complimentary role in this one, and really not even having to like set these. He's not even really like, it's not like they're running KD and Booker off of a ton of pin downs. I mean, yes, they ran like off ball actions to get them the ball in their spots at times, but it was just more so like a ton of them just being able to take Mavericks defenders off the dribble and things of that nature. What exactly led to the Mavericks losing yet another clutch time game, and how did they fall apart down the stretch?
Yeah, this is a narrative that I feel like we've been talking since game one. Since they played the Suns for the first time, the offense just sort of stagnates and the defense collapses as well. Phoenix was able to really pick things up offensively, whether it was getting Booker involved, getting Kevin Durant involved. I know KD kind of had a quiet beginning of the fourth quarter, and then definitely picked it up and made some noise later as the game went along. But Booker was just continuing to harp really inside and just sort of make whatever defender was on him, make him look stupid. It didn't matter if it was Holiday, Reggie Bullock, Ntilikina, whoever it was. It just didn't look like anybody could do anything, and he was able to really exploit any ISO matchup that he was able to get. I think, it wasn't necessarily anything that the Suns were doing. Chris Paul, like you said, he was sort of devoted to a complimentary role and was still able to find an effective way to score throughout the game from 3-point range and whatever it was. And he ended up, I think it was like 7 assists and 6 rebounds, like a decent game from him. And yeah, of course, Ayton, he was able to get things off the boards. And I think, it definitely slowed up. Like, it kind of seemed like as the Mavericks, really in that third quarter mark or 3-minute mark, whenever they took out Christian Wood, is kind of when everything stagnated. And I don't know if that's a direct correlation or not. To me, it kind of looks like that. And I think what Christian Wood was able to do is, and I know like this is sort of what he does, is just spread the floor. And especially a guy against Ayton, who, you can have sort of play in that dunker defensive spot. And he's a good drop coverage big. Like, whatever you run in that fashion is going to, allow him to play his best basketball. That's what I'm trying to say. So having Christian Wood on the floor spreads him out, creates easier paint points. Kyrie Irving, we definitely saw him devote that and definitely, exploit that. Luka, of course, he's sort of got things going. I just think it kind of seemed like as soon as they took out Christian Wood, Dwight Powell just, I'm not saying it was his fault, but it just slowed up the offense. He's not a guy that can really spread the floor, and we know this. You have to run him through staggers, you have to run him through pick and rolls, whatever it is. And we saw one, to tie up the game with like 30 seconds left. We saw it work, but that was maybe the only time all game, and probably the only time in the last like 3 games that's worked. But yeah, defensively, there's really just nothing that you can do against two guys that are so ISO heavy, and especially against a 7-foot Kevin Durant who can shoot anything and make anything. There's nothing you can really do. But yeah, definitely offense stagnated and slowed up. To me, it seemed like whenever Christian Wood went out.
Yeah, no, I would definitely concur. I wouldn't say that there was necessarily like empty possessions for the Mavericks, but the bulk of their possessions looked a lot more laborsome just in terms of how they had to operate, particularly with like Luka and Kyrie. You could tell that they were having to take some tougher shots, and Luka was able to get to the free throw line a few times, but nonetheless, those issues still kind of tended to persist. But if we fast forward to the end of the game here, Christian Wood went out at that like 3-minute and 45-second marker, and the Mavericks had a flurry of few possessions where they kind of traded offense back and forth. KD made a shot in that time span. Luka made a couple layups, as did Kyrie. And Ish Wainwright made, I guess he only made 1 3 at that point. He made one with 5 minutes and 19 seconds left, but they were both by virtue of Luka just not closing out on him whatsoever. Who knows if he makes that shot. Otherwise, he obviously doesn't have the most insane track record as a shooter, to say the least. But And I mean, I get that the Mavericks, they want to pick their poison and things of that nature against a team as uber talented like the Suns, but you at least want to get a hand up in that scenario. And they let Ish Wainwright kind of pick them apart with some of those corner threes that they were conceding to him, particularly Luka. But the Suns got a putback with 47 seconds left off of a Devin Booker jump shot, which honestly was pretty good defense by the Mavericks. And DeAndre Ayton was able to tip it up, and it was 126 to 124 at that time. Then the Mavericks, they ran a double screen at the top of the key, and Dwight Powell was able to get wide open for an alley-oop. It was one of the few that Ayton actually conceded in this game. He did a very good job, as you said, like dropping back. And even when he had to play switch coverage on, smaller guys, I mean, he allowed a few Luka step backs, but other than that, he wasn't really letting any of the Mavericks point of attack ball handlers besides really Kyrie get to any of their spots. It just shows the sort of dynamism of him as, his ability to switch out into small sometimes, but that obviously hurt them down the stretch. But after that, Dwight Powell alley-oop with about 32 seconds left, the game's tied. And then, Kevin Durant just basically sinks into a 14-foot pull-up jump shot, really tough guard. You had two guys kind of jump up at him as well with 12 seconds left, makes it. Mavericks take a timeout with 11 games left. And then, the ensuing possession, Josh Okogie enters back in the game after having not played for a while, and Luka's able to, make a spin move on him, create some space, and he kind of bumps him, and Josh Okogie goes flying backwards, and it leads to a wide open layup. I don't know if Luka was like surprised as to how wide open he was at kind of at point blank range, but it was a weird angle from the perspective that he couldn't really bank it off the backboard, or it would have been a little more counterintuitive to do that. But nonetheless, he misses it. It goes in and out. It's just a tough, bang, bang play. And then we see the whole beef unfold with him and Devin Booker as Devin Booker starts kind of pointing to the floor where Luka Doncic missed a shot, trying to showcase, I guess, how close it was and how easy of a look that he missed. And then they kind of get in each other's face at the other end of the floor. They're still kind of chirping back and forth. They get separated. Then Kyrie ends up chirping a little bit of Booker down the floors after Luka fouls Kevin Durant, who makes the next two free throws to seal the game. What did you think of that whole sequence and, how that sort of, I guess, pseudo beef unfolded? Because it wasn't necessarily, I think all the people are playing it out to be, but it definitely aids to the whole rivalry scene with the Mavericks and the Suns, especially after that playoff series unfolds. And I think that's why it's significant, especially the whole Luka Booker complex and how they're going at each other. How do you, and obviously Luka said post game that he would have wished that Devin Booker had talked and trash talked throughout the game versus just when they got up in the last couple minutes. I mean, I don't know if Devin Booker had been, but that's just, of course, Luka's anecdote. It was obviously, fun from a fan perspective, but you hate to be on the wrong side of that given the Mavericks were losing. What did you think of that whole sequence, and did it get you fired up for a potential playoff matchup versus the Suns?
Yeah, I mean, to answer the easy part of that, it definitely did get me fired up. It got me, whenever you see them getting in each other's face and Luka's the one with a big smile on his face, like that gets you excited about whatever's going to happen next. I know with the late game comments, Devin Booker said that he was kind of talking to the referee. And now looking at it, it kind of looks like he was talking to the ref, but as he was walking away, he started looking at Luka. And I think that's whenever Luka took offense. And of course, that whole ensuing action happened. But I still feel like, this is one where the Mavericks had it in their hands and, didn't give it up, but it was definitely one where they could have won. And I know, it wasn't Luka's best game. He had missed multiple shots from kind of that range anyways. And so you just kind of have to expect that, or not expect that, but you just can't be, too mad. That's one where a class act athlete is going to, miss probably one time out of every 1,000 attempts. And that's exactly what happened. But yeah, I think through all the chirping that happened, and I know, especially with the Kyrie action, I know that that's a guy who, needless to say, has player relations with pretty much anybody in the league. For him to kind of, start chirping and start talking to Devin Booker. I don't know if it was after the game or
it was as KD was headed to the free throw line.
Okay. All right. So yeah, I guess like during that, like that's something that definitely fires you up because like I said, Kyrie is one of the guys who's, very close to damn near every NBA player. and to see him chirping, back and forth with Booker. And I think at this point, I think it's safe to say that, Booker doesn't have a whole lot of fans. I'll admit that. I
In
think,
Dallas, at least.
yeah, at least, yeah, in Dallas. But yeah, I definitely got me fired up. It definitely plays to the whole drama of Game 7, last year. Heck, even times that this year they've gotten in heads, or they've gotten in, little scuffles, whatever it was. With Game 1, we saw that happen. And pretty much every game throughout then we've seen it happen. But this was one where, late in game, things started unfolding. I liked, Booker's comments where he's like, this is what the NBA wants. And I liked Luka's comments where he was like, if you're going to talk trash, start talking trash earlier, not the last 3 seconds. And it definitely plays into the effect of, after Game 6 where, whenever everybody acting tough whenever they up. But it is definitely fun where, I guess the fan interaction between Phoenix and Dallas was fun to see. Because I won't lie, I was kind of surfing through the comments and got me fired up a little bit. But it was a fun game. And I think for it to end that way, being on the wrong side of it, it sucked, but it was also fun. And you look forward to the next matchup, which we hope to be in the playoffs, either first round or second round. But with how things are panning out, it doesn't look like it'll be a first round matchup. It looks like it'll be a second round matchup. But outside of that, I think it's one that gets you fired up about the season. This is definitely one where, Luka's going to be fired up to play the next few games. And I think that's what we need, especially with how we saw him play today, or I guess yesterday.
Yeah, the Mavericks, I mean, we say this every game, really, probably over the last like 3 to 5, but the next 17 games of the season are absolutely paramount to their playoff positioning and how they're going to fare. The West is just so tightly packed and it's such a logjam there that how the next 17 games play over are really, indicative of like the direction of this team, not just for the rest of the season, but like heading into the off season and how we view this team. It's pretty crazy how that could all evolve. The West obviously is very, uber competitive this year. Every team seems to almost be equal in a sense, like 4 through 13. So, these wins matter, especially a game like this. And it sucks to drop a game like that. Like I even after knowing the final score and, watching the rewatch, because I was unable to watch it live, unfortunately, yesterday, like I still felt the sort of gut wrenching aspect. I mean, to a lesser degree, because, I knew the score, but I still felt it even, watching the game, knowing that we lost by 4. So that obviously sucks, but, we have to just sort of take it and move on because nothing else we can really do in terms of our fan consumption. But at least it wasn't a game where the Mavericks played down to their opponent or the effort wasn't necessarily there. One sort of observation I think we can pull away is that this team at least does a good job of getting up for big games as they did last year. But last year they were just a little bit better at closing against these lesser teams. And that's going to be also essential. The Mavericks have one of the easiest schedules, I believe, to close the regular season percentage wise in terms of opposing teams' records. So they need to take advantage of that. And because, yes, while they do have some of these games against these comparable playoff opponents, they are also going to have a lot of games against, lower seeded teams who at this juncture in the season are really just looking to lose. And they're going to have to take advantage of that, or else that is going to be something that is really going to bounce them out of this playoff picture and possibly in the play-in more so than any of these matchups where, they lose by a couple against a really good team. The Mavericks obviously don't have the defensive personnel, of course, for us to really view them as contenders or anything of that nature. But at the same time, their offensive star power at times can just be so overwhelming to teams, especially now that we've seen the Luka and Kyrie fit really coming to fruition. I think the fit has been there since day one, but we're really seeing starting to see how they're gelling offensively together rather than, the whole just possession trade-off thing. And, tonight, I don't know if it was the best example of that. Despite the Mavericks scoring 126 points, they didn't really look as if they ran as much off-ball actions for either of those guys. It did seem a little more isolation heavy, but at the same time, the Suns were doing some different things to sort of facilitate that. And Kyrie took advantage, and had Luka taken advantage, this could have been a totally different ball game. So, we just got to move on from it as much as it sucks. I guess if you want to get into some of the player performances of this game, I guess we'll start, with Luka. If you have anything to add on, I think we've talked about him at nauseum, of course, throughout this one, especially, I hate to do this to the Luka stands, of course, but the defense in this one was not at its peak from him tonight, of course. And that's actually kind of a stark contrast to what we see in some of these nationally televised games. We usually see him get his defense up a little more. So, I mean, I think that the injury may have been bothersome to him, some other outside factors, but that was obviously part of it. Do you have any more add-ons, of course, to how he played offensively? If you want to highlight anything good, because I feel like we kind of harped on him pretty heavily here. He did still score 34 points at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you can probably mark this down as one of the worst 34-point performances, at least in his career. I mean, just to like quickly brief over, something he did good is he was able to really get to the foul line and really exploit the foul line. He got to I think he shot 19 free throws and he made 17 of them. Like that's something that you really don't see a whole lot from him. I know he's improved a lot from the free throw line, but even still, like that volume of free throws, we don't really get to see him make too many.
Yeah, I thought you were meant like the volume of free throws he's taking, because I mean, yeah, 19 is a lot, but he still gets to the foul line quite a bit.
Like even throughout the game, like I think he's averaging like 11 attempts a game, but this was one where at such high volume for him to make 17 of 19 is still, for him, that's really good. Another negative that I wanted to kind of pounce on was I just felt like he settled throughout the game. We saw this kind of early on in his career where, if things aren't really going well, he just kind of settles at the 3-point line. And that's exactly what we saw. We saw him, take either bad step backs or, whatever it was. Like none of them were like just awful misses, like air balls or anything like that. But it was just some matchups where you definitely could have got a better shot inside or, taking it to the hole, whatever it was. And we definitely saw him settle for the 3-point line, settle for a step back. And he went 1 of 9 from the 3-point line in this game. And that was definitely something, especially throughout this year, we don't see a whole lot of them do settle for that 3-point line. But this is one where it even felt like Luka settled at times, and it definitely played into effect, and it definitely played, offensively, and not played, but it definitely hurt offensively for the Mavericks.
Yeah, no, 100%. His, like you said, his just ability to not attack or really furbish his presence inside, or he had a few lackadaisical turnovers that you definitely felt as if he wasn't putting as much pressure on the rim once he started to concede to the step back a little bit more. And some of those turnovers were kind of by virtue of that. When he'd get overwhelmed or trapped by the Suns, a lot of the turnovers were just him not being necessarily in the best position, being lackadaisical when he's having to take that drag dribble. There were a few transition ones that were kind of just overthrows. Like I remember in that first half when he kind of just like overthrew Powell when he was trying to give him like a no look in transition. So things like that obviously can really come to bite you in the back in a game like this. I don't necessarily say that's obviously not the only reason the Mavericks lost, but him having a sort of down offensive game was part of it. But that's not something I'm going to completely knock him for, because I mean, he still scored 34 at the end of the day, and he's obviously the main catalyst of the Mavericks offense. So things happen, and he had an off game, even though it was on national television and everything. I would attribute his defense to this loss more so than anything he did offensively.
Yeah, I feel like we've touched up on Luka, preferably, or just more notably, his negatives. Of course, we covered a little bit of positives, but next up, I figured, we talked about Kyrie. This was definitely, in my opinion, one of Kyrie's better games. He ended the game with 30 points, and it was definitely a really effective 30 points. Just the ability at which he scored offensively, I thought was really effective, and something the Mavericks really didn't have all game. Just as sort of, as you said, like snaking the pick and roll, getting down low, getting downhill. Multiple times he got fouled, had an and one scenario. He went 7 of 7 from the free throw line, so he was highly effective on the offensive end, even defensively at times, especially late in the game. Whenever KD was kind of picked up pretty high up on the perimeter, he was sort of the guy to tail in that double team.
Yeah, he was doing a good job trapping in this
one.
Yeah,
he was doing a really good job trapping. As soon as Kevin Durant or Devin Booker crossed half court, it kind of seemed like he was the guy. I don't know. I assume that was something that was coached. But at the same time, it didn't really look like there was any help defense to counteract that, because at times Ish Wainwright, he's the benefactor of, just spreading the ball around and getting that, wide open corner shot. And I felt like it was kind of derived from that. But outside of that, I felt like he had just an all around savvy game, especially offensively. He had that one extremely nice and one where it just kind of seemed like he was floating and of course got bumped and got it to fall and made the free throw. But yeah, defensively, I even still feel like he had a really effective defensive game. Like I said, picking up the double team, picking up the trap, and even man on man defense. I felt like he was really, really solid at times. At times, it kind of looked like he was a black hole, but he was really the front runner of that second unit, especially early in that fourth quarter when everything's really got going. Offensively, he was sort of he was sort of the main spearhead in that scenario. So I guess I just kind of want to get your thoughts on that and how you felt about him.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ever since Kyrie has joined this team, I mean, even more so amplified in these last couple games, we're just seeing the dynamism that persists when we have two ball handlers on the floor that are, superstar level. And it's something that the Mavericks obviously didn't even have last year. You could argue that this evolution of Jalen Brunson is that, but even last year, I don't know if he was quite there yet for most of the regular season until maybe we got to the playoffs. As good as he is, just having a guy that is able to, blow by anybody at a moment's notice and get you a basket is truly invaluable. And I think Kyrie's really starting to get more comfortable facilitating in the Mavericks system, not just in terms of the, lead pick and rolls at the top of the key and things of that nature. He's doing a lot more of that in those non-Luka minutes versus, just straight isolation possessions. But he's also doing a really good job ball moving, and he is very savvy. When the Mavericks end up getting in a 4-on-3 scenario, or even if he's not, the Mavericks haven't really technically ran anything with him or Luka as a screener to facilitate out of those scenarios, which you could argue that they could maybe try, despite the fact that the defense would maybe switch that. But I mean, otherwise, when the Mavericks are able to, beat a guy off a closeout, and then that sort of domino effect where they start swinging it around the horn starts to happen. Kyrie's just really good about ball moving or knowing when to attack off a closeout and, probing and snaking and trying to get into the lane. So things of that nature have, been a huge help for this team. And I mean, it's just a stark contrast to, be able to maintain really against any team. I think that that's one of my bigger takeaways. It's like the Mavericks they're probably just not as good as a lot of these teams, but they can fight against anybody when you have Luka and Kyrie, just from the perspective of how much, the offense can open up and how much you're able to score if you just get a little bit of negative aggression on the other side. If they can just get to average defensively, which I don't know if they've shown that they can do yet in these last couple of games. I think that there's still questions if they can even be an average defensive team, but there are obviously signs of that. And then there's some sort of slopes of that. So we're going to have to see how that persists for sure. But I mean, his effect on this game was second to none, and he was probably the Mavericks' best player yesterday, undoubtedly. So he had a hell of a game. What do you think of how Josh Green played tonight? He almost had virtually no offensive contribution, but I mean, admittedly, they didn't look to him really at all to relieve any of the offensive burden. I believe he took 2 threes, but I mean, he was relegated to definitely catching and shooting. You could see that some of the Suns' length and, Ayton in particular had an effect on some of those times that we'll see Josh Green try to attack off a closeout and go into the paint. He didn't really do that tonight. He was, acting more as a ball mover, and the Mavericks didn't really create the most turnovers tonight. Booker and KD just do a really good job of taking care of the ball. The Suns only had 9 turnovers as a whole. So, he wasn't getting those transition opportunities that he so highly covets. But I mean, I thought he played really good defense. He was primarily matched up on KD a lot when he gets in there, and that's a huge length mismatch for KD. But Josh Green stayed as active as he could have. I was interested by that decision. I thought that they may have, Booker is a guy who moves a little bit more without the ball. He's a little faster, more comparable in size to Josh Green. But they stuck Reggie Bullock for most of the time that he was in there on Booker, and they stuck Josh Green on KD. I mean, does that show a willingness from, aside from, Josh Green, obviously not really having too much of a role offensively tonight, just the way he played on KD and those spurts that he was matched up on him, and, the Mavericks, diagnosing him to do that versus a guy like Bullock and some of the other defenders on this team. What does that show from the Mavericks staff in terms of their confidence in him as a defender?
Yeah, I think he's definitely looked at defensively kind of as the main spearhead in this. Reggie Bullock, he offers that veteran defensive hardship. And of course, he's a great defender in his own rights, but I still think Josh is kind of that energy bringer, and you have him on the starting lineup. Even, he's been matched up against the best guys on each team for really ever since his insertion in the starting lineup, minus those 3 games with Justin Holiday. I think he just, like I said, brings a different intensity, brings a different energy defensively. And it's something that, is kind of nobody on this team really brings. Reggie in his own right, he's a good defender. He's really kind of, the guy that you want to stick on sort of the more ball handling forward type guys. And that's something that, Devin Booker really is, sort of that off ball mover, a guy who can dribble, get his own shot and everything. And even KD in his own right is that, but KD is a little more slower, a little less explosive. I guess if you're counting, just physicality as something, and that's something that Josh Green thrives in, is just sort of being the counter to someone's long first step. And that's kind of what he did against Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant, of course, in his own right, had an amazing game. He was able to get to pretty much any spot he wanted, and it's Kevin Durant. I mean, he's going to pull up on anybody and make any shot 10 out of 10 times. And that's exactly what he did. But I think Josh was really the guy that facilitated the defense and really facilitated whenever Kevin Durant was on his sort of down moments. It was really Josh Green on him. I think that was the biggest thing. Offensively, you touched up on it, but yeah, it just wasn't really able to get in any flow, rotationally in the offense. Even, in transition, there wasn't really many opportunities for him to run it. It kind of seems like him and Kyrie are those 2 guys in the lineup that can really push the ball whenever it's a transition moment. We just didn't see much of it. The Suns really limited their turnovers and really limited the fast break opportunities. And I think that kind of limits Josh Green as much as you can on offense. And that's exactly what we saw. Even, defensively, whenever it's a sort of around the horn moments and it was in Josh Green's hands, we'd like to see him close out, sort of kick out again, and or just close out, drive to the paint, and, sort of kick out in another corner. But we didn't get to see any of that. And I think it really just limited him offensively. Suns did a really good job of that, but at the same time, it led for open guys like Reggie. I know he knocked down a few threes in this one, and even Kyrie at moments.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think that you could definitely see that teams are starting to respect him a little more. Just his ability to get inside to the paint and attack guys off the dribble. You can see that the paint gets a little more crowded when he goes in there. But I mean, it's just a tough ask against, a guy like Okogie. I mean, I know the Suns lost a lot of their wing depth, of course, and that's one of the hallmarks of those trades, obviously, is giving up Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges. But they still got capable guys, and especially with KD, Booker, and just the offensive firepower that they have in that starting lineup, their stars are able to hone in a little more on the defensive side now that they've had a little bit of that offensive burden relief in them. So, I mean, a guy with KD and his length, or even Booker as a guy who competes defensively, at least, it's obviously just a tough ask for him to be able to, just night in and night out, have a great offensive game every time. You would have liked to at least seen a little more tonight. And I do think maybe his confidence was hampered a little bit after getting taken out of that starting lineup, because we're not even seeing any attempts, and he only went 0 for 2 tonight. So I would, I would like a call to action in terms of just maybe a slightly increased shot diet, especially against teams where he can take advantage of those mismatches, and, teams that aren't as dynamic as the Suns. But nonetheless, I mean, I thought he played as good as he could have defensively. He was running through screens. He was doing a good job, whether he was matched up on Booker or KD. So, I mean, props to him for that. What did you think of Reggie's game tonight? I thought, yesterday, I keep saying tonight, but he made a few threes, and I thought he played really good rotational defense. And aside from getting blown by a couple times on KD and Booker, which, can be expected with guys of that, level of offensive space creation, I thought he really did as good as he could have. And, he made a couple threes. I'm going to see, he even attacked off a closeout and made a layup at one point, which really surprised me, because he actually kind of soared to get it. But he went 2 for 8 tonight from 3, 4 for 10 from the field. It seemed as if he actually shot a little bit better than that. It didn't really seem like his shooting woes were obstructing the flow of the game. A lot of his attempts, I don't know, they looked pretty fluid. And there were a couple shots that he kind of forced up there that he was getting closed out on pretty hard. But I think that he was fairly essential to keeping the Mavericks in the game tonight, in that starting lineup.
Yeah, without a doubt, Reggie it definitely had a little bit more of effect than what we see in the stats. Defensively, as you mentioned, he's beat off the first foot, beat off just bad closeouts, over aggression, whatever it was. But as you said, you can expect that whenever it's against Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. Even still, I felt like he had a really good defensive game. He was, as you said, like kind of the main defender on Devin Booker at times. And even whenever, Booker was really catching heat and making pretty much every mid-range shot he can, Reggie was still playing a good defender on that. Like there's really not much you can do whenever it's good offense, better good defense, better offense. There's really not much you can do in that scenario. Offensively, I like what you said, where it kind of felt like he had better, or I guess like more of a shot diet, more of a volume of shots like that were made. But even still, it went 2 of 8 from the 3-point line. Finished up with 10 points in this one and had 2 steals, just to speak to the defensive side of things. But yeah, definitely felt like one where at times, you could definitely feel him missing shots, but at times it definitely felt like he heated up in this game. And that's, I guess, just really kind of what it entails for him. He was kind of not the main defender, but second defender, I guess, in this one. I would probably tally Josh as the best defender throughout this game, but Reggie in his own right definitely had a great game. Never really saw him doing anything, too special or too intricate whenever it came to offense or defense. Just kind of stuck to his own game. But outside of that, I still think he had a really good game. One where, like I said, you look at the stats and you probably are like, okay, not a very good game from Reggie, but this is one where the stats don't really prove justice to what he did.
No, I would definitely agree. Another aspect of this one that we kind of failed to mention from the beginning, which is kind of surprising, is that Maxi Kleber was out with this one. He was still experiencing a little bit of hamstring tightness. It just seems to be a sort of issue that's kind of persisting after the fallout from that hamstring tear, but I don't think it's going to be anything that, if I'm just guessing, I don't think it's going to be anything that really obstructs him down the line, as long as the Mavericks are managing him right. He was coming off 2 days of rest, of course, in between these games. And so that was interesting to see how they kept him out of this one. But nonetheless, I think his inclusion of this game could have definitely provided a little bit more paint defense, especially with how switch heavy the Mavericks were having to be in this game, just with the amount of ball screens that the Suns ran, with Chris Paul or KD and Booker at the top of the key to get them mismatches and things of that nature. I do think Maxi could have helped a little bit in this one. I mean, I don't know how much the ripple effects of that would have been on the game, but I mean, that obviously matters too. By virtue of him missing this game, the Mavericks actually went to Markieff Morris a little bit for a very brief stretch in I believe it was like the end of the first quarter, beginning of the second quarter. And he only played 2 minutes and some change, but it almost seemed as if he should have got a little bit more run there. What did you think from the brief couple moments we saw from him?
Yeah, I think, I'm trying to really think of why they brought him in. I want to say it was.
I mean, he was playing the 5 when he came in.
Yeah, I was about to say.
It was when Ayton went out, and I think Landell had came in. So I think they were kind of just probably trying to stretch the floor a little bit and see if, when they did get those switches, particularly on like a KD or something, a bigger guy like that, maybe he could provide a little bit of perimeter defense. But, we did obviously see him get kind of pinpointed in the pick and roll a couple of times. I think Campaign blew past him. But against those bigger guys, he's not really necessarily a terrible defender, and he's got a lot of strength on him. So he made a 3 when he was in there in transition. But I mean, should there be a call to action for him to see a little more time on the floor, or do you think that the inability to guard guys like under 6'6" is going to provide too much of a stranglehold for his ability to see time on the court and just his like general shape and stuff?
I think there's an argument to be made there. I think if you're, I guess, just looking for some more, not even like stretching the floor, but just more size, I guess you can say, you can definitely throw him in there. I think that's a guy, you could probably throw in there with Maxi.
That's
Maxi,
what I was thinking. I think he should be playing with a big. I think he should be. I know it's positionless, but I think he's a guy that needs to be matched up on bigger wings or 4s and things of that nature. I just don't know if he has the height and length. Like it sketches me out when he's playing the 5, especially against better centers. But against a guy like Landell, it's not terrible to go to for a few minutes.
No, exactly. And, we saw Cameron Payne exploit that quite a bit, just, I guess, getting the pick and roll going and beat him off the first step or beat him by speed alone. But outside of that, I think that there should be a little bit more of a call just to play him. We're seeing him get minutes, definitely a restriction on that. He's not playing like any more than like 4 minutes a game, but in the minutes that we are seeing, I think that we haven't seen anything too negative. Like he's probably doing the best he can, role wise. For a guy that doesn't play a whole lot, he's finding ways to get in the game, offensively and defensively for that matter. I think it's someone that come playoff time might be a little interesting to see if we can work him in a little bit. And I mean, heck, I'd like to see him get a bigger role now, but yeah, like I said, just pairing him with a big, I think would be interesting because offensively, his game works more as a 4 or a traditional 4
than as a roller for sure. Yeah, you don't
Yeah.
want to see him relegated to. I mean, he can stretch the floor. Like I think against like some of those drop coverage fives, like Landell, for instance. It's not terrible to throw him out there for a second. But you can get 8 and alive on the glass as well as defensively. So that was a really interesting wrinkle that they went to. So I'm interested to see how Mavericks fans sort of respond to that. I know we covered Tim Hardaway Jr. and his sort of second quarter explosion. I mean, he went 6 for 10 from 3 tonight, 21 points. What did you see from him tonight that really invigorated a sense of Tim Hardaway Sr. being in the building, even though he wasn't there tonight?
I think I want to see a statistic on this, but I feel like Tim has been playing really good on national televised games, especially ESPN games. This probably will be the first game of the season where we've lost where Tim Hardaway's made 6+ threes. I feel like I feel like we could probably tie that as the first one. It definitely felt like the first one, but yeah, I mean, just his effectiveness, being able to create not his own offense, but be able to create like in transition threes, just sort of pull up threes. Oftentimes, those are shots where you look at it and you're like, okay, that's not a good shot initially, but after it goes in, you change your mind. He was able to really be the benefactor off of like, yes, he made a bunch of threes, but even, driving and sort of pulling up in the mid range. I think it was Tim Cato had an interesting stat where he's like 42% from 3 in the last 2 months, but 32% from the inside the 3-point range.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it was something like that. But I think that this was one where definitely it looked like he was more effective pretty much anywhere on the floor. And heck, even defensively, he had a very good man-to-man defense tonight. Rotationally was a little lackluster to say the least. Definitely more of a Tim Hardaway game rotationally, but man-to-man up defensively, I felt like he was really effective. He had that one. I felt like this was probably one of his best defensive possessions of the season where, with like 18 seconds left, Kevin Durant took him off the dribble and had that insanely pull up jumper in which he made. But I mean, Tim Hardaway was all over his face. I don't know how he made that. I don't think anybody in the league could have made that other than Kevin Durant. And of course we saw it go in, but outside of that, I still feel like, Tim Hardaway, this was probably one of his best games of the season. And I know it came in a loss, which sucks, but this was one where I don't know. It just kind of seemed like whatever he was doing, he wasn't missing from pretty much anywhere on the floor.
Yeah, and I like the way that the Mavericks have been using his spacing to really revolutionize the offense when Kyrie or Luka's in there. And I mean, they've kind of done this with Luka, but obviously the defensive woes are sort of sacrificial of this. But when you're able to, they use him a lot in like horns actions and at the top of the key. With him as a ball screener when he gets really hot, and then flaring out to make some threes. And I mean, that just creates a lot for the spacing, because if Tim starts getting as hot as he is and he can't miss from 3, Kyrie and Luka draw double teams nearly like every time. So, I mean, that's just going to lead to a lot of opportunities for him if he can cash in. So, I mean, there is something to the effect of that. He did close the game today over Josh, which I thought was interesting, but I mean, he had it going. So, and, Josh was playing good defensively, but the way that the match sort of evolved into a shootout, I don't know if I necessarily have too much of a problem with it. Especially since he wasn't really a black hole in defense, at least man-to-man tonight. So, I don't know how much better Josh would have defended the last possession than versus Tim, just in terms of how he's able to, get his hand up on KD and things of that nature. I'm not saying that he's a better defender or anything like that, of course, but like, just he was competing tonight. I mean, yesterday, I keep saying tonight. And, I can't break it, man. But it was not a sight for sore eyes, because Tim's been pretty solid down the stretch here. But I mean, if we can get this continued offensive output from him, that's really going to do wonders for this team. as we close out the regular season and, get to the playoffs. And, as bad as their defense can be at times, it adds another dynamic to their offense when he's hitting like he is. So that was great to see from him tonight. Otherwise, what did you think of Justin Holiday tonight? He got some, Justin Holiday and Frank for that matter. They both got a little run where they had to, kind of defend Katie and Booker, things of that nature. And I think they provide some invaluable wing defense. They were hitting some tough shots over them, of course, but I thought they played solid defense. Frank specifically really didn't contribute much offensively. Besides making a free throw after he was one of the few guys that actually got a transition opportunity tonight. And he cashed in, made 2 free throws. And then Justin Holiday, I think he was able to pick off an inbounds pass one time, and then he made a corner 3. But other than that, I think, it was really that their wing defense that the Mavericks, I don't know if they play Frank in a game like this, if they're not playing the Suns, who are just so versatile in terms of how many ways they can score. And, there's a call to action for them to come in the game. And I don't know how much they limited KD, but I mean, they tried, and I thought they played pretty good defense for what it's worth.
Yeah, I think just like the build of those two is able to not counteract what they do, but it definitely, I feel like it was more of an effort to stop and even, limit both those guys in Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. But even still, like, they were able to pretty much score at will. But I thought that was the two, like, off the bench defensive duos that really, are really effective. I like how you said, you don't really throw Frank in a game where, you need offense or anything like that. But in a game like this where you have 2 spearheads who can score in pretty much any fashion of the offensive end, like, you have to pretty much throw him in there. We saw what he did in the playoffs, that being Frank, we saw what he did in the playoffs against Devin Booker. Not saying he had the same effect in this game, but definitely brought a different dynamic. And I just think that those two really brought, an intensity and a rotational defense that this team doesn't really have in that starting lineup. And off the bench is honestly kind of a treat to have. Justin Holiday offensively, like, pretty much did what he was asked, made a corner 3, I think, and then I don't remember exactly what sort of 2-pointer it was. I think it was like,
no, it was like a dunk in transition.
Yeah, I was about to say, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah,
he got that pass. Yeah.
Yeah, but outside of that, I think offensively there wasn't much that they did, wasn't really too effective, but I mean, efficiency wise, I guess if you want to call it that, they were really good on offense. And yeah, defensively, I think that they brought a pressure defensively that I just don't think anybody else on that bench can really bring.
Yeah, I mean, I get in a series against the Suns, or really like any other team that has 2 dynamic ball handlers, or even more guys that can put pressure on the rim. If you want to count Chris Paul, of course, who I think you would probably want to not negate his inclusion, of course, as well. These are guys that, I mean, can take a little bit of that relief off of Josh and Reggie. And I mean, I think in a playoff series like this, like, both of them could honestly see a role just from the defensive perspective, even though, Frank has a tendency to be a black hole on offense at times. So I thought that they definitely served a purpose tonight. Even though they played limited minutes, I think they played 22 minutes combined, but they weren't just a bleak 22 minutes of nothingness. So that was good to see. What do you think of the whole Dwight Powell versus Christian Wood thing in this game? Obviously, we kind of talked about earlier when we were talking about the game sequentially, how Christian Wood, didn't play those last couple of minutes, but he got a little bit more burn in this one than we're accustomed to, because Jason Kidd rode his hot hand a little bit throughout large stretches of that fourth quarter. But he kind of scarcely played in that first half, and the Mavericks definitely deferred to, Dwight a lot more without having Maxey in this one. What do you think what did you see from both of them tonight, and who do you think should have closed the game?
I mean, I guess I'll start with the elephant in the room. Even though Dwight had overall a pretty good game,
he battled on the glass as good as he could have versus Aiden, but
versus Aiden,
he proved no, comparable sort of size comparison there, because Aiden was just towering over him. I mean, he had 16 rebounds in this game, and there admittedly there weren't a lot of rebounds to be had in a game like this, because of this sheer amount of points scored on both sides, but that makes every more rebound, that much more valuable. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, Dwight Powell's effectiveness wasn't felt too heavy, but even still, he didn't have a bad game, at least. I felt like in his role, I felt like he played pretty good. But even still, Christian Wood, the hot hand, and you can even argue was more of a defensive pressure whenever it came down low. I I guess we saw like the cold snaps of the Phoenix Suns, the very few that we saw. I think Christian Wood was in the lineup. Not saying, there's a direct correlation there, but I mean, there's definitely something to be said about that. Definitely the guy who kind of kickstarted the offense at times. Whenever I thought it was stale, he was kind of bringing in a pressure, whether it was, closing off of whatever it was, getting inside the paint, dunking. He was kind of
in that fourth quarter.
Yeah, especially in that fourth quarter. And like as I mentioned, defensively, I thought he was really good. Now that last 3 minutes, we already touched up on it. I definitely think that, I don't think it was a coincidence that the offense kind of, or even defense for that matter, it stagnated whenever he was taken out, in that 3-minute, 45-minute segment, or whenever he was taken out, whenever it was. I definitely would have liked to seen him sort of ride it. And I don't know if this was kind of a weird minute thing where you feel like, you can't play him past, 20-ish minutes in this game because he's pretty much played the whole entire fourth quarter. I don't know if it was something like that or whatever it was from Jason Kidd, but I still feel like should have rode the hot hand there, and he did at times, but let him play. I mean, it definitely seemed like I said the defense and offense was kind of piggybacking off of what he was able to do.
Yeah, no, and just his ability to serve as a release valve, like when we haven't really seen a lot because he's playing with these bench lineups so much of him, Luka, and Kyrie together. And I know that there's some defensive holes that can persist, of course, especially, it's very like game dependent, with Christian Wood and his defense, but in a game where, his switching was actually pretty valuable in this one, he was able to guard up against some small guys, things of that nature, as well as being able to, also defend Ayton as good as he could have. I mean, he forced a couple misses at the rim there. Those are, that's what you're looking for from him. And he's obviously not always going to bring that to the table, of course, but he got up for a game like today. And when he's not a black hole on defense, and he was relieving as much pressure as he was offensively, I mean, there's an argument to be made that he should have played some more minutes. I mean, I don't know if it would have affected the final outcome, but who knows really, I guess but he was having a really good game, and it didn't seem like it was obstructing from the flow of the offense. Sometimes they make it like a concerted effort to like get him involved, but it seemed as if more like, if the possession was dead, they'd go to him, or, I'd like to see a little more probably like direct Kyrie, Christian Wood actions, with trying to like actually do some pick and rolls and things of that nature, like we saw with Luka early on. And I just think they could open a lot more up for the Mavericks offensively in terms of their spacing if they play a little bit more, as much as they're scoring right now. But nonetheless, I mean, in those bench lineups, I did think he did a good job pinpointing mismatches and, isolation scoring, which isn't always the case, but in a game like he was doing good tonight, I don't know. I would probably wrote him down the stretch, but it is what it is. Did you have any gripes with the officials tonight? But I mean, I don't even know if I did. I didn't think that they were too bad. But particularly the ESPN broadcast seemed very, and Mr. Hubie Brown, all 85 years old of himself, looked very favorited towards the Suns. And I was kind of getting annoying at first now, because this seems to be our little special now where we microanalyze the broadcasting of the Sunday matinee games. But did you have any gripes with any of that stuff tonight? Because I saw some complaints, of course, on Twitter and stuff.
Yeah, so I won't lie. I listened to the first half with sound, and then I listened to the second half without sound. Not saying that it was, that awful, but there's definitely times, and I know me and Will off the air have definitely had many conversations about how old and how this man, Hubie Brown, should probably be retired by now. But yeah, without a doubt, I definitely do think that there was some annoying moments in the game. It definitely wasn't as bad as that Lakers game, I felt like, but there was some questionable calls, to be said the least. But yeah, outside of that, I didn't really feel like I listened enough to have too many rants, I guess, to go on about this. But yeah, I don't know how you feel about it, but there's definitely times where it's kind of cringy.
Yeah, for sure. But no, I don't think the officiating affected the game in any sense. Like, it was pretty solid on both sides, but there were a few iffy calls going either way, so it kind of is what it is. Nonetheless, did you want to get into any guys from the Suns? I know we already kind of covered the main spearheads of their offense a little bit, but did you want to highlight any of their role players that played decent tonight? I thought like Josh Okogie, for instance, had a good game. We obviously talked about how Ayton's offensive impact kind of fizzled out because of just the extreme shot diets of Booker and KD and how they really didn't need to go to him. It's kind of a nice luxury to have. The same as Chris Paul, who can kind of just freelance and bring the ball up the court, and then just they'll run some pin downs and staggers for Booker and Durant to get the ball in their spots where Paul's facilitating, but in large part, like, he's able to just kind of play as in this sort of consolidating role where he can just attack off a closeout, and he's just like another offensive valve that they had. I know his defense isn't necessarily what it used to, but I think it makes Chris Paul's role a lot easier, especially for him at this age. You can see how it's just not as laborsome as what he had to do for the Suns last year, and that's a huge luxury for them. But they definitely they got some good contributions from their role players. We obviously talked about Luka not closing out on Ish Wainwright. There was even one with Torrey Craig, and those two guys, as well as Josh Okogie, just kind of talk to their, first off, their like defensive impact, but particularly with Okogie, and how what they were able to do offensively, even though Okogie severely struggled as the Mavericks continuously left him open from three.
Yeah, I like, you look on the bench outside of Ish Wainwright, there really wasn't anybody that was too effective. Wainwright, of course, had those open corner threes where I just felt like Luka was kind of the benefactor of why he made those, just really a lack of effort closing out on those. And, any NBA player, I don't think you can really leave wide open for a corner 3-point shot. And that's another guy where, isn't the best shooter, but it's NBA talent. If you leave anybody open, anybody can make it. And that's exactly what we saw. We saw him make 4 or 5. Josh Okogie, I think, was like the lone starter where, you kind of look at the stats and definitely say he had a bad game, but I think there's arguments to be made that he definitely had a really good game, especially defensively. He had some really, really good moments against Luka, and kind of just, limited Luka to settle. And that's exactly what we saw Luka do. He settled on some shots, and that's, kind of what effect he brought. He had that one off of I don't know if it was a free throw or a missed shot or what, but he had that one putback that was honestly pretty clean. And I know early in the broadcast, they had mentioned how, since putting on the mask, he had a really elevated offensive production. And I think that 3 of 13 shooting tonight yesterday was kind of counterintuitive. But I think he's the guy that, you can kind of limit offensively, but defensively, he shows his mark, and he did on this game. And even still, he found ways to get it done. And even still, like I said, he had a good game on one side of the ball, not really offensively though.
Yeah, no, 100%. They have a plethora of guys. Like, they're a little deeper than you would think. Just some of the sort of buyout things and trade deadline things that they did just to be able to throw out defensively. They obviously don't have the insane splashy defenders that they did in Cam Johnson or Mikal Bridges, but if TJ Warren ever gets hot, I know he's a little bit past what he was doing a couple of years ago with that whole bubble performance and everything. But Damian Lee, Terrence Ross, like Darius Baisley and Saban Lee didn't even play tonight, and both of those guys can provide some wing defense, especially Baisley against some bigger guys. He played a pretty integral role for that young Thunder's team. Like, they may actually have some decent possession, so that'll be intriguing to see how that sort of wraps up as we go forward.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Like, this team, you look on paper, they definitely have more depth than or at least what the argument was post Kevin Durant trade. Darius Baisley, he's a guy, at least throughout his career, has been pretty efficient, and he's not even given minutes in this team. But outside of that, the Suns, they got it done tonight, or they got it done yesterday. And of course, closed out the game better than the Mavericks did, and definitely headways for an interesting playoff series if these two ever do meet. And I would be I don't know how to word this, but I'm definitely looking forward to it, to say the least.
Yeah, you would be enthralled if they played each other in the playoffs. And just outside of the actual on-court product that we're more like logistically inclined to cover, and as much as you kind of hate it sometimes, like the ESPN narratives of like the two stars of Luka versus Booker and Kyrie versus KD and the whole legacy thing, like that would be like really cool to see, of course, as well. So it'll be interesting to see how this involves with them. Of course, the Mavericks 2-6 in their last 8 games. They only got 17 games to mend these wounds. They've already lost, I think, 2 more games. No, they've lost more games now officially than they did last year. So because they're at 33 losses, I believe. Are they at 500 now?
They're 33 and 32.
So yeah, they're almost at 500. So
they play the Jazz tomorrow.
Yes, they play the Jazz tomorrow, and I just saw that Max is questionable in the injury report. So hopefully we get him back to counteract Markkanen a little bit, even if it's just in whatever capacity that he's playing against him. But also I just want to make sure he's healthy for the playoffs because his inclusion will be paramount. But another rough one for the Mavericks on national television, guys, and it sucks, but got to move forward. This is the stretch of the season that is integral to how this team fares. I guess we'll see what happens. Another news, like Nerlens Noel came off the buyout market. He was signed by a 10-day contract to the Nets, but I mean, I guess it's still technically possible that the Mavericks get him off if he comes off of that 10-day. They're still seeking rim protection. There's some other guys on the buyout market. I don't know if the Mavericks are really poised to do anything at this point, but I guess we'll just have to see. I still hope that they make a move around the margins, but at the end of the day, I just don't know how much it's going to matter with how already, sort of limited this defensive is and how poverty stricken it can be at times. Those buyout guys just won't play enough to marginally increase it, but nonetheless, this has been another episode of Mainstream Mavs Podcast. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at mainstream_Mavs. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you are on the YouTube gang, or if you are on the YouTube gang. Shout out to the YouTube gang. Comment if you're on YouTube how much Europeans are playing in the Mavericks versus Jazz game. Just give me the total, or actually foreign-born players for that matter.
How many?
How many? How much? Oh, geez. My girlfriend always harps on me for doing the whole much and many spiel, but whatever. Nonetheless, also make sure to subscribe or follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or whatever respected podcast platform you're listening on. We're on almost everything, so you can just literally go to our link tree and find anything there. And give us a 5-star rating and tell us what you like or dislike about us as you feel so inclined. But we appreciate you guys if you listen this far in the podcast. And Jaren, we will catch you guys Tuesday night versus Utah.
Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.